welcome back to another episode of the CounterCast. I'm your host, Leon Idle, and we've got an awesome show lined up for you guys. We've got some fantastic guests, and you know, as always, we're here to start your Monday off strong by giving you honest truths, honest conversations. We may agree, we may disagree, who's to say, but at least we are having the conversations. But enough about that. Let's get into saying hello to our guest. First the stage, we got Mugen Lord, the only man on the internet who has hair better than me. Tell the people who you are and what you do.
All right, hey guys, it's me, Mugen Lord. I'm a YouTuber that cover a lot of culture war content as far as what's going on in the entertainment industry. I also cover a lot of fighting game and JRPGs. And I'm also a comic book writer. I have a comic book coming out pretty soon. That'll be launching around like September. And as you can see right here, my comic book characters right there. But yeah, I'm happy to be on this podcast today.
Man, I am happy to have you on. Thank you so much for coming. But you know, it would not be a culture war-esque podcast without Cult Classic Cage Cast. Tell the people who you are and what you do.
All right, so I had to toss, Cassie to the background because, I heard that there's someone here that apparently is a threat to our world and everything that we know. And unfortunately, Leon and Mugen, combined, you guys have a power level of about 20. And, it's about 10 apiece. And since Cassie's a woman, she has the power level, obviously lower, of 8. So, yes, I'm here because apparently my future self had warned us about this individual. And, if you're interested in Cult Classic Cage's content, then, go check out her channel. She talks a lot of shit. She's pretty entertaining. Not as entertaining or as handsome as me, obviously. But, it shall suffice. So, I'm here.
Oh, thank you so much for the surprise interest of Kid Trunks. I appreciate you showing up, coming to save the timeline from this up-and-coming man. He saved Universe 7, and now he's here to educate us about the truth, what's going on behind closed government doors. We got Chuck Huber. Tell the people who you are and what you do.
Hello, my name is Chuck Huber. I'm a voice actor. You probably know me from Android 17 or maybe Hiei from Yu Yu Hakusho or Android 13 from DBZ or Garlic Jr., Emperor Pilaf, Master Shen, Mr. Shu, Kibito, all from DBZ. Super Android 17 from GT. I know not a lot of love for him, but I think there should be love for him. And in case you want to hate me, since that's a favorite pastime of some, I do play Shao Tucker in Full Metal Alchemist. So, that's a good enough reason to hate me there.
I was really hoping you'd bring that up because if you wouldn't, I wasn't going to be like, and just so everybody knows, this is the man that ruined your childhood. This may be the first traumatic anime experience you ever had. So
it was pretty terrible.
Let's say hello to the chat and see who's in here. We got Dante Erics early AF with a thumb smash. Appreciate you, bud. That's right, everybody. Hit that like button. Show support to all the guests as well. We got Dax and R0. Hype for Hiei. That's right. Seeing some Yu love in the chat. Love to see it. We got J Blue. Mugen, good to see you. That's right. Show love to all the guests here. T-Gap Steve. Jumpin' Jeebus nowhere near the front page of poppy YouTubers. They must have downgraded Leona to second best hair. Hey there, Wheeled Snakes. How you doing? We got Blaine's Escape Corner, another fantastic channel. If you're an anime fan, make sure you check out Blaine's Escape Corner live every weekday night. We have Cass in the chat. Vasnum, appreciate you for showing up. This man is the king of Texas. He understands that Texas is really its own country. It's not a state. Texas is its own country. Do you reside in Texas, Chuck? Oh, nothing. You're muted. There you go. Are you back? I think you were muted before.
Yeah, I accidentally unplugged the mic, and I was like, what have I done? Yes, I live in Fort Worth, Texas. I've lived here since 1997. Before that, I was living in Chicago. Went to school in Chicago. And
what an upgrade.
Yeah. Well, I love Chicago. I mean, Chicago's my town. I'm going back there this.
Chicago is probably very different in 97 than it is here in 2024, though, if I had to guess. Oh, I think we're having some connection issues with Chuck. He'll be back in a moment, though. We'll keep saying hi to the chat while we're waiting for him to return. We got Dempsey. How you doing, bud? Super Savage Spirit. Hiei, one of my favorites. Absolutely the GOAT of the entire show. I completely agree. Chaos Sonic, Words of Paradise. What's your opinion on Disney's Encanto? We will probably get into that in a little bit. We'll go ahead and keep saying hey to everybody first. Serrano, Shout Tucker was a great villain. I completely agree with you. Vinzinger, El Taku Lord. It's so many folks showing up. Rocky, I appreciate all of you. Guys, we're about to get into a great show. A lot of it, honestly, focusing on the negative, but that's how a lot of these go. When you're talking about culture, when you're talking about politics, it devolves in the negative. So I like to start the show the same way as always. What positive thing have you been doing as of late? What positive, content have you been consuming, whether it be video games or just nerdy endeavors or something you've been doing that's been bringing joy to your life before we get into the mess that we're in now? Feel free to just take the reins, everyone.
All right, who want to go first?
Hold on, I have to get something.
And don't everyone jump to it at once.
Can you guys hear me? I'm back here. Can you guys hear me?
There you go.
Yeah,
we can hear you now. Perfect.
All right, good.
All right. Oh yeah, I guess I go first. Well, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out, so I decided that hey, I gotta catch up on my backlog of games. So I decided to go back and pick up Final Fantasy 16 and try to finish that as well. And Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, I'm trying to finish that. And then on top of that, still working on my comic book. I've been talking to my artists and everything, so I've been busy doing that. And then my daughter, her birthday coming up, so I've been trying to figure out what gifts that she wants for her Nintendo Switch and everything. So, but other than that, yeah, that's all I've been up to, just playing some games. About time, I had some free time to do that.
Love to see it. Cass, Chuck, what about either of you guys? Anything positive that you want to gush it out before we talk about culture stuff?
Go ahead, Cass.
I've officially completed my collection of Bruce Lee films on 4K Blu-ray. Watched
Nice.
Way of the Dragon as the first, and looks insane. Just the art style alone, bro. I was like, yeah, I have to get all of these because they all have like a similar art style, and I love Bruce. He's the fucking goat. And to have all these, apparently, the Big Boss has a new Mandarin cut. Oh man, that's so sick, bro.
That art is incredible.
I know, man. It's so good. How can you not fall in love with that as a longtime Bruce stan? Even Game of Death. I hate Game of Death. I mean, it could have been a great film, if Bruce had been alive to complete it. But even Game of Death has an awesome graphic on it. You got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on there too. Big shout out to the homie. I love it, and I've been playing Persona 3 like crazy. It's such a good game.
It's so good. I knew you would love it.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Chuck, what you got for us? Anything you've been enjoying lately? Just positive things in your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably the biggest one is I have a baby due in May. Nora is going to be joining us at the end of May. This will be
awesome.
child number 9 that I'm raising. 6 biological, 3 steps. So,
man, that's awesome.
Wow.
Big
go
family.
big or go home.
I think that's a great thing because considering that America is at a birth deficit right now, you are doing your part, son. I love it.
Yes. I don't know. My wife and I were talking. She and I hadn't had a baby together, and so she was like, "I want a baby," and I was like, "Okay, if we do a baby, then I'm done. Like, I don't have to do anything else for the rest of my life." She's like, "Pretty much that'll cover it." But we were thinking, what are we going to do? Binge more Netflix? I mean, why not have a baby and do the raising the kid thing? Because our youngest is 12, so it's been a minute for me. It's been 12 years, so I'm not I don't want to say I'm nervous. I'm well schooled, and I know that it's going to be difficult and rewarding and awesome and all that stuff. So hopefully, a little older, a little wiser, it won't be as much of a challenge as it was in the past.
Yeah, because 6 times the charm, So
that's right. You either become a better person or you throw a baby through a window. Like those are your options.
Well, at least
You're
there's
right in on the show with
siblings
comments like that.
to look after her. So, awesome.
That is nice having kids who are of age to help take care of the baby.
Of course.
Which is always good. Always
Well,
good.
Congratulations. That's awesome to hear, man. I sincerely mean that because I wasn't necessarily, it was funny, but not necessarily joking about the birth deficit. I mean, we are seeing that a lot nowadays, and not just Western culture, but I think there's a problem in the East. There's a problem in Europe, which you consider, what's still Western culture. Is like we just seem to be at a birth deficit in general due to shifts in what people value. And I think that's an awesome thing. And we're actually going to get into a lot of the, what we think of culture here in a bit. But I got to ask you first and foremost, have you been aware of, because I know that Mugen Lord, Cassie, myself, we've all talked about on our various shows and streams, the massive backlash that has been brewing on the internet and about the localization culture and what's going on with modern anime. Has that crossed your airwaves at all?
So this would be about writers interpreting the Japanese original content and trying to make it Americanized. Is that what we're discussing here?
Yeah, so they've been doing what seems to be, at least from outsiders looking in, trying to westernize it or not necessarily even westernize it, but change context to make things, whether it be social or political, where they weren't before. And I was curious if that's something that if you had thoughts on or you'd experienced, or sort of where you were at in that sort of discussion. Obviously, well, in a way that's not going to burn your job.
No, I've already burnt that job several times, so it doesn't really. There's no way. I'm like I'm some type of like tick. Just you can't get rid of me. But it's interesting because obviously the great majority of actors and writers in the industry are politically liberal, which is fine. I am neither political. I'm apolitical. I think there's probably reptoids in the hollow earth that are controlling most of it. That's just sort of my way of getting out of the discussion. I've never met a reptoid. I'm not sure that's a true thing, but if I met one, I'd be like, "What's up, dude? Or what are you doing here?" And we'd like chat. But the overwhelming majority of the writers and actors, especially at Crunchyroll, are politically liberal. And so obviously, and that's kind of the trend throughout most of the entertainment industry. And so you are in an ocean that is bent a certain direction. So all the content's going to go that direction. And when I was a writer at Funimation for 5 or 6 years, I wrote with Jamie Markey, and she and I couldn't be more different politically. But we were really great writing partners, and I think that's part of the reason we were great writing partners was because we wouldn't find each other's sort of natural biases funny. We only found funny. So it just depended on, and we were writing funny shows. We were writing Hetalia and Sergeant Frog and some of the other ones. So like when it comes to comedy, at least I think it's those cheap shots that people make where it's like, I can slip something in that says something politically and it doesn't really belong there. It's like, it just kind of ruins it, kind of takes you out of the story and makes you focus on stuff that has nothing to do. If it's integral to the anime, if the anime is making a Japanese political statement and there's a corollary in American political life, that's fine. That's the type of transfer of ideas that should be happening. But I don't know, anything further than that, it doesn't really bother me because I expect it. And I'm not a big fan of content, because like anybody can make content now. So if you're complaining about it, you should just be making it. So that's what we do. We make movies and try to make stuff happen. So
Mugen Lord, that's someone that does make content, but also someone that makes videos, but also is making your own content. Like, do you have thoughts based on that, or is there any sort of way that you correlate that to what it is that you're working with?
Oh, talking about with me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. As far as like talking about my comic is concerned and stuff, right? Like that, right?
Yeah. As far as your comic book or anything that you work on creatively, outside of the culture war stuff, like, do you have a sort of similar thought process in terms of now for you it's probably, I imagine, a little bit difficult because this is your own work as opposed to interpretations of others. But where do you fall in sort of that sense of politics or not necessarily even politics, just social ideas in your work and whatnot?
It's everything I make is just based off of my experience and what I would like to see, and hopefully when I put it out there and for everybody else to be able to check it out to see if they have the same, interests that I have and stuff like that. But the thing is, it's all about the creativity. It's all about the stories. It's all about, keep all the politics out of it or whatever like that, and just create something that people want to invest in. People get a chance to connect with the character rather than identity politics and everything like that. So I just go off of that. Just like, hey, this is what I like. This is what I would like, for people to be able to see, what's up in my head and everything like that to like enjoy and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't really just think that hard about it or whatever. But I try to keep all my personal politics out of everything that I create.
So, and we've said the word politics a lot, and I don't even necessarily know if that's fair to bring up, because so many of the people that are, in my opinion, understandably upset about localization changes aren't actually, several of them aren't of a political nature, so much so as they're of a, this does not match what the Japanese context was. Why would you make that change?
Yeah.
So I guess the question more comes down to, at what point, you've got someone like Tolkien who's dead, so you can't ask them, hey, what would your opinion be on an adaptation of Lord of the Rings where we changed XYZ? You can't answer. The man's not around anymore. Whereas so many of these artists and authors are still around. What is there a process to getting any sort of approval, or do they just give you free reign to make the changes that they think will sell, or sort of where's that bridge?
As far as the anime goes, they, it's pretty tight oversight, especially if it's one of their AAA properties, if it's My Hero or DBZ or, one of the Chainsaw Man, something that's really, really front and center. They'll send the scripts up the chain and people will look at it to make sure, nothing offends. So those get looked at more heavily. I think a lot of times people complain about changes that happen in lesser known anime, and those just have less oversight on them. And to some extent, it's like, I think sometimes fandoms are searching for things to be angry or offended about, when there's plenty of ways to just say, I don't like. To me, I'm starting to see that the sort of offense anger cycle that happens is really part of the problem, and that the maybe better choice is just to ignore it, just to pretend it doesn't exist. If something bothers you, if something like there's an anime and it does something that bothers you, you just say, I'm not going to think about that anime, I'm not going to talk about it. And that, is your vote for it there. And you pick one that you do like and you champion it, so use anything like that as an opportunity to do, something positive and something abative, so that you're not, you're just not looking at it anymore. I know we can't stick our heads in the sand, but.
Right. And that was going to be my next question. Where does it go in terms of, where do you consider things being, like you said, burying your head in the sand versus genuine criticisms? I know that I would like to believe, again, I can only speak anecdotally through what I've talked about in my criticisms or my critiques or whatnot. A lot of these criticisms are from a place of passion where, hey, we want to support this, we would love to spend our money on this, but you're not giving us something that we feel like is worth the value that you're asking. So it's very much a consumer to a consumer relationship. Is there they're obviously going on X and shouting obscenities and wishing negative things on voice actors or localizers? That's not an effective means of communication. But how do you make that communicate? How do you bridge that gap when it seems like a lot of individuals who are passionate about this stuff are being treated like enemies as opposed to fans, and more importantly, paying customers?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, obviously it's different. I have to have a little bit more of a wider view and a little bit less of a critique of it, because I'm in so my critiques usually come in process. So if I am in process in a show and something strikes me as wrong as an actor on that show, I get to have a say. I get to say, oh, you know what, I think it would be better like this, and the director can disagree with me. The actor's opinion holds a lot of weight, especially if you're validating it from the perspective of, this is my character. I've done this for instance, with Dragon Ball Z and Android 17, we've had, Chris Sabat was the first director, and we're probably through on to director number 6 by now. And we've been with these characters way longer than they have. So they'll take our opinion into account much more strongly. And if it's something offensive, like if it's something, if you're in a show and it colors outside the lines and you're offended by a line, they'll take that into consideration too, and try to give you something that's less offensive. That's the only time I've refused to say lines in anime, when I was like, that's kind of really horrible. And it was usually in Shin-chan. So the Shin-chan
when you say offensive, just for clarification, do you mean like offensive to you personally, or you think that, hey, culturally this is different in the West than in the East, this would probably offend a large group of people? Just
Yeah, well, with Shin-Chan, it was purposely trying to. It wasn't. We didn't match the Japanese at all in Shin-Chan. It was taken off the rails almost completely with the comedy. So the comedy was able to paint outside the lines pretty broadly. And it was only when I was like, I just can't say those words out loud. They're just not. That wouldn't be something I would ever tolerate. So. But that's rare.
The Ghost Stories production, the Ghost Stories was very similar, and Ghost Stories to this day is celebrated as one of the best "so bad it's good" dubs of all time. I mean, I adore as much as individuals like myself claim, hey, we want accurate dubs. Ghost Stories is a golden gem because it's so bad. So
right.
While localizers are definitely an issue, especially now since they seem to be at least to some extent politically motivated, or they just seem to hate the very community that they're employed to get this content out to. The reality is that censorship or changes in anime have always been a thing. This isn't something new. I mean, for example, I have a copy of Angel Cop here, and this is a more recent copy in which this anime came out in like 94, I believe, and they just recently released a version of this with the unedited English titles. How many years later? This came out like a couple of years ago. So like this has always been a thing. And in some cases, it might have been worse during certain periods of time. As for being offended, yeah, I guess some things definitely are, can teeter, especially in Japan. They definitely they have their own ways about them, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'll say Mobile Fighter G Gundam is one of my all-time favorite animes. You can't deny the reality that Neo Mexico is literally a planet that is shaped like a sombrero and a cactus at the same time. So things like that, it's like, yeah, Japan, they have their ways about them. I personally don't get offended by it because everyone has their fuck shit and across, every country. So
yeah, it's true.
It's for me to sit here and be bad. It's like, whatever, man. Like, as long as the show is good, but ideally, I would like the most accurate representation that basically the main artists, the people behind this, the people that created it, like what was their intention? I want to know that. And I would like to learn something too. So like if understanding what's being said requires context, I wish that there was a way to get that context to actually learn how people in Japan think, because I mean, at the end of the day, I would like to learn something new. And I think people in America, a lot of us are genuinely intrigued by Japan, their entertainment, all sorts of things, even down to like their candy and stuff. Like we genuinely find them interesting and kind of a breath of fresh air from the bullshit that we're used to over here. So
that is interesting because the Japanese, like if you want the true Japanese experience, well then you just learn Japanese and watch it in Japanese. And second best is to watch the sub. And the dub is where most of the extra sauce comes in from the writers. So there's options if you don't want to suffer it.
For me,
it's funny you say that. Sorry, go for it, Cass.
No, I'm the special type of asshole that does watch things dubbed, but I have the subtitles on too.
Oh, wow.
I do the same thing. I actually took 2.5 years of Japanese, and I wouldn't say I was fluent by any means, but I was definitely conversational. I was at a point at one point where I could watch anime without subtitles, and I would understand the context, understand enough to be able to keep up with it, but not understand like nuances. I certainly wasn't well versed enough in like tone to know if the acting was good or bad. Like a lot of people will ask why being an anime fan, why I watch stuff dubbed, because a lot of people will talk about how the Japanese language version is so superior. And full on admit, I can appreciate good English acting. I don't have the skill set to appreciate good Japanese acting. And like, to me, when you're watching something, not just anime, but any visual medium, you want to take in more than the story. If you just want the story, you can read the book, but you want to take in the editing, the sound design, the acting, and I find that to be a much easier thing to do with dubs. So
yeah, I grew up my entire life, watching anime and dub. I think my first experience actually watching anime that was in like Japanese subtitle was Dragon Ball Z before Dragon Ball Z was ocean dubbed here in the West. So my whole life. And then back in the day on the Sci-Fi Channel, they had a whole anime block. So everything I used to watch on the Sci-Fi Channel was in dub. That's why with me, I don't really get really offended by some of the localization and everything, because my whole life I was watching everything in English dub, and I wouldn't have noticed any of the changes or anything like that. And now that you have, today where you can watch both sub and dub, more people are finding out that, hey, they're changing things, and I don't like this. But for me, it don't really bother me much unless it's like really, really cringy, So that's my take on it.
So, well, then actually, I like to use that as a springboard to sort of jump like away from anime, but in the same vein of the conversation. So I brought up Tolkien earlier, so let's kind of roll with that. So, Rings of Power came out, and it was more or less maligned by fans. It had less than a 40% completion rate on by the time the final episode was out, and that's largely attributed to the fact that so many liberties with the source material were taken. Now, is there something like, since you're outside of that sphere, since most of your work seems to be in dubbing and working in the Japanese side of the industry, when you see something like the backlash that Rings of Power got, what is your outside your view outside looking into something to that effect? Does it come off as mostly just angry fans throwing a fit about a nothing burger, or is there something more to it?
Well, here's the deal. I grew up with Tolkien and then read all the Tolkien books to my children twice. And it
Good
was
dad moment. Well done.
Yeah, with those and the Little House on the Prairie books and Chronicles of Narnia, that's usually what we get through. But there is the Rings of Power. I started watching it and then I stopped watching it because it wasn't entertaining to me. And part of why it wasn't entertaining was because it did not feel like it was in Tolkien's world. It felt like it was in a different world. And so I watched it as if it was just a cool, awesome series. And from that perspective, it was fine. It's a fine, piece of work. It's as good as anything else I've binged. I've binged a lot of stuff, and Rings of Power was fine. Was it Tolkien? Was it the love and care that Peter Jackson took with the movies? Was that put into it? Absolutely not. It was. I don't want to say it was offensive, because making art is hard, making movies is hard, and they very purposely moved themselves away from Tolkien's universe because of sort of what seemed like arbitrary DEI, goals that they were setting for the world. Which, okay, you can do that, but that just makes it not part of what Tolkien had written up. And once you don't, and I think that's the same thing with Japanese anime. Once you feel like it's out of that world, once the changes are enough that it doesn't feel, you don't get that connection to the world that you love, that's when, for me, I start going, it's not as interesting to me. But I tried to like it. I really, really did. And I really, really didn't. And because whenever there's a backlash against something, I usually try to like it. I try to see, well, can I like this? Do I like it? And that was one I couldn't. I didn't like it.
Well, it's super easy in today's modern age, especially with the internet, to jump on the hate train, and like we've all been guilty of it with something or another. And I won't lie, I only watched the first episode of Rings of Power. I'm going to continue the series, but it was very difficult to get through. But there's been plenty, like with the example that I gave a couple months ago was when the Furiosa trailer dropped. And as a culture war critic, obviously we talk about DEI, we talk about, the investment companies like BlackRock putting money into things to what seems like, force a culture shift through economics. And it's terrifying to look at that on the macro scale. So when you're going to the micro level, you see something like Furiosa that, in my opinion, the Furiosa trailer had atrocious CGI, but it was fine. There were a lot of individuals that were screaming about how the movie was quote unquote woke. And I'm like, I don't see that. I mean, maybe that'll be the case when the film comes out, but I don't see that. So far, I just see a movie starring a female character that has already been established in a previous film with some awful CGI that I hope they are able to fix before the movie actually comes out. And if it ends up being a DEI nightmare when it comes out, by all means, roast it then. But you've got to at least experience it and have the information. You can't jump to those conclusions before you have the information. 9 times out of 10, I would say that Disney's burned their bridge. They've given us nothing but about half a decade of crap. I don't trust them anymore. But aside from Disney, I'm willing to give the vast majority of whether it be games, comics, movies, whatever, a chance and see if there's nonsense in the product.
Yeah,
I
I
always,
think we're really
go ahead,
good,
Cass.
Mugen.
Oh
Go
no,
for
I
it,
was
Mugen.
saying, like, I even tell my audience that don't be so reactionary. Just wait till all the details, all the facts come out, because when it came to like Tekken 8 and the game didn't come out yet at the time, it was like a couple of days before the game released, and there was a screenshot of Lily talking to one of the newer characters talking about cultural appropriation, and people were saying, "Oh my God, Tekken, Namco Bandai is going woke with this," and then I was like, I posted a screenshot of it. I said, guys, don't call something woke yet. Just wait for the actual context. This is just screenshots. And I was right, because after that, when the actual like the scene came out on video on YouTube, it was them poking fun at the whole situation with Western culture, with cultural appropriation and stuff like that. It was poking fun more than anything else. So that's why I try to tell everybody, just don't be reactionary and just call everything woke on site,
Yeah, I think that we definitely need to find a middle ground, because I feel as though, um, like for me, I'm kind of like sitting in the middle. Like, you guys are slinging shit at each other like monkeys, and I don't want this stuff as much as you guys don't. But we can't just be reactionaries to every singular thing. And you have to understand that the reality is, while these businesses are politically motivated in some ways, that at the end of the day, they do want to get the most amount of people to potentially buy their product. So when I look at something, I expect there's gonna be a lot of stuff that I'm cool with, that appeals to me. I expect that maybe there's gonna be like this one little itty bitty thing there that's kind of like, that's kind of cringe, or that's kind of nonsense that you didn't have to include in there. But I could live with that. Like, it's when it's when you include so much stuff to the point where it's like, okay, y'all are just definitely putting your political thought process in this game to an extent where I can't deal with it. Then it's like, okay, I have to walk away. Like, I remember getting, a lot of hate because I'm like, guys, Starfield, it lets you, pick your gender in the modern day way, I guess, of your pronouns and whatnot. And it's like, okay, this is garbage. It's stupid. If you want to be a certain gender, you just pick the male character or the female character. Like, yeah, we know that, but you could just ignore it entirely and just continue on, and it's not brought up to you at all anymore. Like, it's not like I'm playing this game and every time I'm coming across someone, they're saying something super sus. Like, I played the game for over 200 hours, and the only thing that was like, okay, this is kind of stupid, was the pronoun option. But like, to sit here and say Starfield is just woke and you should write it off or return it, and it's like, there's other issues with Starfield that you could talk about, like the performance being kind of shoddy, the graphics, eh, like stuff like that. Maybe some of these storylines, some of them a bit hit and miss. Like, dude, like I prefer to talk about like main issues, like not just call something woke. Like, I want to talk about the intricacies of things and have a discussion, not just be like, oh, this is woke and just write it off. Like, this is like, at this point, we're just kind of having a childish conversation because we don't want to get actually have real discussions anymore. It seems like we're so reactionary sometimes that we just have to that immediately one little thing, oh man, it's over, and kind of can't be that way.
Well, real quick before we continue, I want to say thank you so much, Blaine's Escape Corner. You did not need to do this. Anytime someone sends a super chat, it goes back into the channel. It goes to try and make our operation better. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you. He says, watch Spirited Away with a bunch of people who had and hadn't seen it before. And after was lessons on Shintoism with Blaine. Love learning. I completely agree, brother. Always love learning.
It's awesome.
All
I watched
right.
Spirited Away for the first time with my best friend because it was like her favorite film, and I'm like, I never actually got to watch that. That one kind of skipped by me, so we ended up watching it. It's awesome.
Miyazaki's a great example of sticking with culture and story, and being able to sort of reveal truth through those sort of eternal aspects of his films, and the sort of any of the sort of inclusion stuff that happens where it sticks out as cringe reminds me of when they first started doing product placement in films. So it would be, they would try to incorporate it, but then it was just so obvious that, you know, this Hershey bar is in the scene because Hershey's bought a spot in the film. So, you know, you kind of tune it out a little bit and just let it slide past. But that's what it seems like it's getting to now. Like it's being sort of woven in like product placement was back in the day.
You're not
Well,
lying.
that actually leads into the question I want to ask you. Seeing as you've been doing this for you know a while now, I mean, I'm not trying to call you old or anything, but you've been doing this since like 97, I believe, haven't you? 96,
Right.
97,
Yeah.
right around there. And so have you noticed, or what have you noticed about, if you've seen one at all, an uptick in you know, political and social messaging? Because that's always been in films. People want to complain about, oh, woke this, or oh, DEI this. There's always been, not in every film or medium, but there's frequently been messages being put in films. And in my experience, it's the subtlety is different nowadays. It feels like they either don't trust the audience to figure out the message on their own, or there is some larger party at play paying them to say, hey, put this front and center at the at the cost of story, characters, whatever it be, to push the message. I mean, what are your thoughts on someone who's been a part of media for the last several years, and whether or not you've seen that or how it's affected you, or anything that you've experienced throughout your career?
Well, it's fascinating to watch the white man take the back seat and the sort of lesser position in terms of casting, especially with commercial casting, even with film casting. There is a lot less out there for and still there's plenty, but I mean, they did a really good job of mixing it up so that it wasn't just white guy led films with a token here and a token there. We're starting to see more of the culture of the world, which is what I appreciate. When a film, focuses in on Argentina, or focuses in on norteños in Mexico, or whatever it is, that the film, the story it's trying to tell, without sort of artificially inserting it. I like that we're getting a broader culture from the world. I don't like it when it seems stacked in. And personally, I mean, it's made me have to go out and create my own work, because the job of auditioning was like, oh, I don't. And then you're like, oh, I feel like all Black people for the past 50 years, because like all the roles are like, you're the white evil guy, you're the terrible, Añocha or whatever. So it's like, oh, those are all the roles now, because that's kind of what the culture wants to see. And it's like, I'm angry about that. Well, no, don't be angry. Just go make your own content.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the villains are the best part anyway. Like,
That's true. It's true.
come on, man.
So I mean, I agree. I think there's this misconception that, at least again, in the realm of movies, I can't speak too terribly much about the voice acting in the 90s when in the realm of movies, the 80s and 90s were, at least by my memory, incredibly diverse in what seemed to be a natural way, as opposed to, because of the way it's spoken about by the actors themselves, or the studios themselves, or the writers on social media. It seems like they were trying to erase the fact that there has been, at least again, in my opinion, proper diversity in films, and the way that worked was by just doing it, as opposed to preaching about how amazing they are for doing it. I think that is the catalyst for what's turning people off. There's a reason that there's the trope. I mean, Family Guy made a joke about this in like 2005 or something, about how, oh no, it's a multiracial sitcom gang, and it was like a white guy and an Asian guy and a Mexican guy and a black guy, and that's the joke was that that's been happening on TV prior to 2005. So I'm not sure what the narrative is, that we haven't had, again, at least in films and TV, haven't had diversity.
Well, what in the 80s and 90s, the diversity was a little bit more token. I mean, it was a little bit more like white-centered shows with, a good Black lead or a good, Hispanic lead. What we're seeing now is a lot greater mix of that. They're leaning a little hard, anti-white, which the whole world is, but that's kind of an expected backlash, which is already starting to even out. But if you were to talk to any of my friends who were Black actors in the 80s and 90s, every time they got an audition, they were like, oh, great, another drug addict. Oh, great, another, so it was very common for them to not be able to find roles in TV and film that were not, kind of offensive. And the ones who got the roles that were not offensive were stars. So, so black stars were getting roles that weren't offensive, or movies centered around ideas that were important to them. But the rest of the actors were sort of filling in the gaps, and there wasn't a lot. Now there's a lot more commercial work, a lot more television work, a lot more film work, just because the film industry is opening up in that way.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that makes 100% sense just in terms of the working actor. And I think this is something that honestly is probably regardless of race. The working actor is the majority, 90 to 95% of your actors. Not everyone is going to be, Will Smith or Harrison Ford. 95% of them are people that do guest spots on insert weekly TV show here, like NCIS or whatever.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
Well, then from there, I would actually like to sort of switch gears a little bit, because we're getting a decent amount into this. And I feel like YouTube can go fuck itself at this point. You posted something that I found beautiful on Twitter a few days ago. You said something along the lines of, the most satanic thing is taking a baby that's been born for 60 seconds and injecting it with a needle full of STDs, or something to that effect.
Yeah, 60 minutes. 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, I did tweet this.
And you've been doing this well before Elon took over Twitter. We've seen a lot of folks start to come out and have these sorts of opinions post the buyout, but you've always been very outspoken on Twitter about these sorts of things. So have you noticed any sort of change in the dynamic from pre-Twitter to post-Twitter, since your style of posting hasn't changed?
Well, I go back to, I protested at the Federal Reserve in Dallas with Alex Jones in 1997. I started studying vaccines around that time as well, back when you had to print out paper and share kind of rare books to get the information, and you had to, checking the information was a little harder. It's probably just as hard now. But in terms of where we used to be, and I have a panel called the Fringe Panel that I've been doing for 20 years now, which is all about conspiracy theories. So I've been speaking publicly about things that are controversial for decades. And I was safe in my Fringe Panel because it's an 18+ late night panel. It states
my best
what
friend
it is.
actually went to one of your Fringe panels a few years ago, and she said you were talking about 9/11 conspiracies the whole time. That it was that you 100% convinced her that it was an inside job. Like, her and I were talking about this last night. We went to one of your Fringe panels. So
yeah, for sure. 9/11 was kind of that. I was always a little bit in tune with it. I kind of grew up with it with my grandma, and the Weekly World News was my favorite paper growing up. I had headlines, Bat Boy or whatever that's how I decorated my room. But yeah, 9/11 was the one that really, really woke me up. But in terms of like how we're able to, just the fact that I can talk about this stuff openly on a podcast that's going to go public, that is everything. I mean, there was a period when you would have an observation, and it wouldn't match with reality, and you wouldn't be able to talk to anybody about it because you were afraid of what they would think of you, because you thought something was different than what the mainstream was telling you was correct and was reality. And now you can talk about almost anything publicly, and you'll get, there's people who will attack you for everything. But compared to how I used to be attacked, because I was anti-vaccine. None of my children have been vaccinated. I studied that a long time ago. And so that's since 1999. And you didn't tell anyone. I mean, you had to sort of go in armed with the law if you were going to give birth in a hospital, and you had to go with someone who was going to be present and be able to state what your wishes are and hold that line firmly, because they would threaten you, and they would threaten CPS, and they would try to do it without your permission. You had to be on point to prevent your child from being stabbed with a needle within the first couple hours of birth. And that needle would have, hepatitis B in it, the surface proteins, which is the antigens, but it's still, you're scraping part of the hepatitis B, sexually transmitted disease, sticking it in a needle and stabbing it in a baby. And the thing that convinced me on that was that, and that's sort of the one that started me down the path, was that the chance of a baby getting hepatitis is highest from the hepatitis vaccine, both because it is hepatitis in the vaccine and because it's a needle. So you're getting a double whammy. If it's an infected needle, you could give the baby hepatitis. So if the nurse has hepatitis and accidentally has a little blood, and it gets in the needle and it goes in the baby gets hepatitis. But luckily, it's being vaccinated for it. So maybe it won't get it. But the idea that you need that, so the sort of math equation came like this. Is a baby going to share needle drugs or have unprotected sex? Or do drug companies want to make a shit ton more money by having everybody take their vaccine? And when you weigh those two things, you're like, oh, I think it's drug companies trying to make money. And I don't think it's
that's the RFK Jr. argument. That's an argument that I also like. I would never consider myself anti-vax, like as a blanket statement. I am very much. I think that most people who do the reading and whatnot are conditionally vaxxed. Like, hey, if I'm going to be going to South America where the yellow fever or whatever it is rampant. Okay, yeah, probably get vaxxed. But also, I remember being 13 and trying out for the track team and them telling me I need to get insert vaccinations here. And I'm terrified of doctors. I'm not scared of a whole lot of things in my life, but doctors, hospitals, medical stuff terrifies me. I mean, absolute phobia of it. And my thought process was, why do I need to get multiple shots to run on a track when I've been healthy my entire life and I've been going to school as is? Like, it was even at 13, I thought that was a strange requirement just to play a sport.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely. You have to look at it shot by shot. But we went from having 6 shots in 1986, and then the manufacturers were granted immunity from liability, and now we have 72 shots, and that exponential growth is. It's ridiculous. Like the idea, maybe the immunity is allowing them to stab a lot more people and make tons of more money. And everybody knows vaccines are right up there at the top, if not the top, for their profit centers. And they don't, if there's no reason to inject a baby with sexually transmitted disease, unless you think your baby's going to be sharing needle drugs or having unprotected sex. And the hepatitis B vaccine does work, allegedly. I haven't looked into it, but I would trust that it does work for babies who are born to mothers with hepatitis B. That's originally where it was created, what it was created for. But since it was, quote, safe for those babies, they said, well, let's just give it to all babies because we want to make more money. And once that became apparent to me, and once you see the sort of regulatory capture that happens in the FDA and CDC and just all the government agencies being controlled by corporations, especially the drug companies, you start to question everything. And once you go down that line of questioning and say, well, do you want, and I think everybody has to choose where they lean, and do you want to lean more on your own personal responsibility and your own personal health, or do you want to lean more on having drugs take care of you? And absolutely, I believe in the mechanics of doctors and surgeons and nurses, and especially believe in antibiotics when there is a serious need for its staph infection. That has been incredibly helpful. The amounts of surgeries that they're able to do to solve different issues and problems, all that, wonderful. It's like a car mechanic. A car mechanic is never going to change the way you drive by fixing your car. So the way you drive this car has to be, 100% on you. And if you're not exercising, if you're not eating well, if you're not taking care of yourself and you want to supplement with drugs, that's your choice. But I don't think we've gone to where it's the default. Adderall's the default.
We should also be able to call out that, yes, it's your choice, but it is a bad choice. Cassie here has lost over 100 pounds. I've lost over 55. Mugen, you work out frequently. All of us, to my knowledge, none of us took Ozempic. So, like,
Yeah, I wasn't even. I didn't even get my daughter vaccinated. I didn't even get vaccinated. And the thing was, a long time ago, I never really thought anything of vaccines until the pandemic happened, and I noticed that how the media and everybody was in cahoots, and they've given out incentives like, we'll give you free beer, we'll give you Krispy Kreme donuts if you get vaccinated. It was all these different incentives to push you. I'm saying these guys are really pushing hard with this vaccine compared to any other vaccines that I've been alive. I've never seen this amount of marketing or advertisement. That's what got me hesitant about it.
Yeah, it was the marketing push, and then the loss of job, loss of career that happens if you didn't get vaccinated, which absolutely affected me. Just one example, I was invited to Anime Weekend Atlanta. Huge convention, was going to be my first time in Atlanta, first time at that, one of the top tier anime conventions. And maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks before the show, the owner, I think his name is Faisal, he said
Pfizer?
that.
You mean like Pfizer?
Yeah.
But no, that's what he did. He said, if you don't promote, he said directly to me, if you don't promote the Pfizer vaccine online, because he had seen me being publicly facing about my beliefs about, hey, they don't make vaccines this quick, and that's insane, and how about no, and how about all these other treatments? Like, there's a whole bunch of other ways to take care of COVID. It wasn't just the vaccine. But he said, if you don't promote the Pfizer vaccine online, I'm going to cancel your contract. And just so you know, like I do okay, obviously, but we live, not month to month. But if you have planned in your budget a huge convention that's going to cover you for 3 or 4 months, and then it just disappears, and then if all your director friends disappear, and then all the agents won't talk to you, and your agent drops you because you're unvaccinated, and suddenly you're like, oh, I guess I've just lost my entire career. And that's a little depressing at first. And then you go, oh, well, I didn't lose it. I lost that shitty part of the career where I'm not in control of what I'm making, and I'm being challenged by the universe to do something better. And so that is where I ended up. It doesn't mean it wasn't scary, especially during COVID, when you were like, everybody was a little afraid that, because a lot of people did go down the tubes during COVID. It was very, very destructive time for people.
Yeah. I don't know, because Cass, you live during COVID. Were you still living in New York City, or had you already moved out to Philly?
Hell no. I left. I'm in South Central PA for like 7 years now, about. So.
Okay. I was saying,
Yeah.
I live in a decent sized city, but it's also in the Midwest. And like, while we had COVID restrictions by law, no business gave a fuck. They were like, yeah, go ahead, try and make us mask up. We're in the Midwest. We're cattle ranchers. We have guns. We don't give a shit. So like, I think I wore a mask into the movie theater just to like while when it was all lit and stuff. And like, the moment the lights go down, all right, mask off. I'm about to enjoy the re-release of Return of the Jedi or whatever it is. Like, there's, to me, it was the conversation around COVID was incredibly strange to me, just because I've never, or at least for the last several years, never really believed anything that was on the news. Not whether it be Fox News or CNN, right, left. It's not a political thing. It is, hey, these are people that have power. These are people that want to have influence. By listening to them, you give them that influence, and so don't do with it. It was very simple to me. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, during the whole pandemic, I didn't even wear a mask unless I had to go in and get my blood pressure medications at my clinic. But other than that, I did most of my shopping online, and Amazon, they made billions of dollars during the whole, shutdown of the city. But Philadelphia, they took masks very seriously. I hated the whole mask situation. So when I used to go outside, even do my walks and my jogs and everything, I would see people walking around with masks on, and I wouldn't have a mask on. They would see me and they would walk around me or try to avoid me because I wasn't wearing a mask. Like, everybody was walking around paranoid. It was just sickening. It was just nerve-wracking just seeing that.
Yeah, and in the state of PA, like, in order to get your driver's permit, you have to get a physical. And So I walked into this.
That seems invasive by the state, but okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of questionable things in every state at this point. But yeah, so I went to urgent care and they're still forcing the mask stuff. And I'm like the only asshole standing there without the mask on. And they know not to tell anyone anything at this point. Are they really gonna fight it? Like, bruh, if I'm gonna get sick, I'm gonna get sick. There's no mask that's gonna save me or you or anyone else. The only thing I have to depend on is thankfully my pretty decent health. Thankfully. And it is what it is. Like to really just put myself in massive discomfort. And another thing too, yeah, I was gonna take pictures that day. So I wasn't gonna wear no sweaty ass mask in a sweaty ass freaking nasty place. Just because these arbitrary rules that are meaningless. It's like they're still trying to push the nonsense. And it's like, okay, I could see if this, scientifically did help, but through the fact that COVID isn't gone yet, shows it's kind of bullshit.
Real quick, I want to shout out because we're running a little bit late on the super chats just because this is a very interesting and excellent conversation. But thank you so much, J Blue 88 Hood Gamer. The way modern Disney is today with wokeness, I don't think I will buy Kingdom Hearts 4, to be honest. And you know what? That's a totally fair mentality to have. The reason I wouldn't buy Kingdom Hearts 4 is because Kingdom Hearts 3 fucking sucked. It had nothing to do with wokeness. It was just a really disappointing game that we waited 13 years for that turned out to be trash. But whatever floats your boat, my man. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Gonna miss physical media when I actually do want to play something, but I don't like the company and I want to buy used.
Actually, it's funny you bring physical media up. That's also on the docket for today. I was curious if Chuck, being conspiracy minded in the way that you are, is like we have noticed an absolute, in my opinion, intentional decline in physical media. Do you think there's any reasoning behind that is more than just, oh, here's the convenience of streaming?
Yeah, 100%. There is through 9/11, I got to see, because I keep my finger on the pulse of that, I've got to watch the narrative of that day change in the digital media, because a lot of it's only available in digital media. And if you're just a mainstream Google, YouTube person, you may never, ever find anything. So this push to physical media, they can literally, if you look at what they're doing with AI now, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it was like the last interview on Tucker Carlson was a guy who was talking about censorship and how the military industrial complex is utilizing these different sort of political tools for censorship. And you will have sections of people with crafted narratives that are digitally selected in order to produce an outcome. And I think that's part, like, you can't imagine a Black Mirror world where two individuals right next door to each other with differing sort of viewpoints that need to be shaped or massaged by the machine in a certain way will have completely different views of what's happening in the world. It even happens with me and my wife, because she's on a different sort of section of TikTok than me, obviously. And so I will inform her as things come across my plate. And I'm like, oh, are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? And she won't know anything about them. And then she'll start looking at them. And same thing with her. If something comes across her algorithm that she thinks I may not be aware of, she'll share it with me. So there's this push to put this complete, and everybody's like, Elon Musk is the free speech god. And sure, but he also wants to chip everybody's brain. Which is sort of the digital slavery thing. Like we are within narratives among narratives with narratives underneath them and narratives above them. I think it's really difficult to discern with any narrative as to what the intended purpose is. And that's why, sticking close to home and sticking close to what you believe the truth is and making stuff that you think is amazing and saying stuff that you think is important. That's about all you can rely on as far as what is actually happening in the world right now. I don't know, man. It's all goofy, that's for sure.
There's massive forms of chaos because it's just, I don't know, in my opinion, it's like sometimes I believe, man, maybe there is a cabal of people running shit. And then you think about it, it's like, but damn, there's just so many, like you said, different narratives out there. It's like, I just think it's a bunch of different people just desperate for power. And that's why we have all these crazy things going on at once. It's like chaos, really, from people that are obviously nefarious.
You look at the NFL, because like I have buddies who all love the NFL. And I personally think that people are like, the NFL is rigged, it's scripted. And I'm like, well, not exactly. But what I bet is going on is that there are certain players or certain refs who are controlled by certain team owners or conglomerate of team owners who try to craft a narrative. So there's a different game going on top of the NFL game. So there's, 90% of the people pushing one way and 10% maybe owned a ref, maybe, is going to throw a call. So like the game gets stacked, but I think they don't know the outcome either. I think they're competing against each other on a level that we aren't allowed to be aware of. Although I think it would be awesome to know like the backstory, like the inside dirt on who was throwing what during which game. I mean, I think that'd be awesome to see. But I definitely think people are being
film The
influenced.
Longest Yard, the Burt Reynolds movie, The Longest Yard. I mean, is that got sent to prison because he was a ref that took behind the scenes bribes to throw a professional game. And so, I mean, if I would like, so many people forget that reality is stranger than fiction. If that happened in a movie in 1978 or whatever the year The Longest Yard came out was, then why would that not be happening? And like, I agree with you that the NFL is not rigged in the way that the WWE is. It's not. It's scripted. The WWE is I hate saying the word fake because it's not fake. That shit really does hurt, but it is scripted. And I do not believe the NFL is scripted. There's just way too many. You would have, there's 11 dudes on each side of the team. You would have to have them all 100% executing, perfect choreography every game. That to me just logically doesn't work out. However, like you said, though, the powers that be paying off individual reps now and again for some bad calls, that I don't know anyone who would deny that that's been probably going on in the history of sports entertainment in general, not just NFL, but just, basketball in the 50s probably.
I mean, I could argue that with the last play of this previous Super Bowl, one blown coverage is the deciding factor. Fairly simple.
It's true.
Yeah.
Vassnum says it's mind-blowing that the internet thinks if you buy a game you should own it is a hot take. It's common sense. Are you familiar with this argument, Chuck? Have you seen this narrative going around about the digital ownership versus physical ownership from these large media companies? Or
I've not delved into it, but I definitely believe that we're putting ourselves at risk from a capitalism perspective of having everything we own deleted and forced to rebuy it. I mean, they do that all the time.
And rebuy an edited, censored version that now adheres to the modern day, whatever the current modern social insert problem or viewpoint is.
Yeah, change history, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's what happened to Skullgirls, the game. People had bought the digital version of it that wasn't censored, and then the moment that they changed leadership within the company, they decided to go in and censor the game after that. So people who bought the digital, they turned their game on. They found that their version was also censored, like right there on the spot. That's why this whole digital thing is it's a no-no. But
they've been doing it forever. The Zapruder film. So everybody knows the Zapruder film from the Kennedy assassination, right? But those of us who weren't weren't alive when he was assassinated. We typically don't know the order in which things came out. The Zapruder film was well known right after the assassination, but it wasn't released to the public until the 70s. But what they did do was they allowed Dan Rather to watch it and then tell us what he saw. And he lied through his fucking teeth. He was like, Kennedy's head came violently forward when everybody knows he got violently blasted back. So he's directly changing the physical media by they delay the release of it, and then they tell the populace the opposite of what the film shows. And that guy gets to go on and be a CIA Mockingbird front. I mean, it's all owned by intelligence agencies now. Hopefully it's decentralizing and splitting up. But Dan Rather, it is absolutely undeniable that he looked at the Zapruder film and then lied to the world about what he saw. But because of this, it didn't get released till like 10 years later. He's nobody says, hey, you're a giant fucking liar about something that's really important. And he just gets to be this hollowed, newsman when he's just a fucking dick. That's all he is. He's just a horrible, horrible, lying human being. But we're like, oh, yay, he's the old school news. No, he's not. He's
You're
intelligent
absolutely speaking my language. So I'm out of curiosity, because you mentioned you were talking about how awful the three-letter agencies are, the intelligence agencies. So when there was a lot of discourse when he was in the race about Vivek Ramaswamy, where there's people who were like, he's the greatest, he wants to abolish all these three-letter agencies. And there were others saying he's telling everyone what we want to hear. This is too good to be true. He must be a plant. Did you have thoughts on that when he was in the race?
Yeah, so I don't believe anybody can get to that level without some level of tentacles in them. So I personally believe everybody is compromised and they choose what they're compromised by. And I think you get to have a choice into who you're going to trust to keep your family alive. Because a lot of times it probably comes down to, I'm going to murder someone in your family. And if you got two competing interests saying, I'm going to murder someone in your family, you're like, well, I'm going to go with these people because I like what they say better. And I think they're going to keep my family alive. So for whatever it's worth, I believe everybody in the public eye at that level for the presidency is beholden to other people and they get to choose. I think they allow them to select. These are the important ones. And they go, nope, we're going to delete this one. Like they deleted Joe Rogan's, a belief in the moon landing.
Alex Jones, yeah.
No, but Rogan forever was like a moon landing critic, and then he got his big Spotify deal, and I think they were like, "You can do everything but this," and he suddenly switched his opinion, which was weird. And then
it's crazy how they're still covering up stuff like that to this day.
Wild. Yeah, there's such a simple answer for people who want to believe in the Apollo missions and don't want to look at the just mountains of evidence that are like something is freaking goofy here. Such a simple answer is they've got tech that's far beyond what they're showing us. And they're just kind of repeating the front of what the Apollo missions look like. But those astronauts are terrible actors.
It's safe to say it's safe to say that, our government's at least 30 years ahead.
At least.
And that's just being modest. But that's the one thing. Like, so I've never really looked into like the conspiracy theories with the landings, but I have seen the interviews, and when you're listening to them speak about accomplishing one of the greatest feats for mankind and watching how they act as though someone died, it's just naturally kind of creepy. I know nothing of the context, but just watching the interview where they're discussing it, it's like, are we at a morgue or something? Like, shouldn't we be like hype about this? Like, it's just some basic, like, okay, I'm feeling this room and it's not the energy I'm expecting.
Well, I mean, you said 30 years ahead though, and that was why I was going to. So my grandfather worked in government for many years, and all he's told me, and again, this is just me taking my grandfather's word. I don't see why he would lie. He's never lied about Vietnam or what he saw being a Detroit cop, so I don't know why he would lie about this. But he said that he had been to Area 51 once. He cannot tell me anything about it other than, and he used that exact number. He said, we're about 30 years ahead of anywhere you think we are. Or at least that was the case in the mid 70s or late 70s, wherever it was when he worked in government. So who's to say where we're at now? That was 50, 60 years ago, but that was his experience then. And he is by law not allowed to talk about it. It would be considered treason I don't even know if he was technically allowed to tell me that he's been there, but again, he gave me no details other than what I just said. So
yeah, I can't remember where I heard it from, but they said that the government is actually 100 years ahead. That's what I heard, 100 years ahead. And it's this thing called Project Bluebeam. You ever heard of that conspiracy?
Sure.
Yeah, where they talk about.
I'm familiar with. Lay it on.
Oh yeah. Project Bluebeam. This is why we're starting to see a lot of AI, and we're starting to see a lot of holograms. They were saying that the deep state or whatever like that, the powers that be, is supposed to stage I guess you say an alien invasion, and this is the way to by using holograms in the air to try to get the government, get everybody to unify as one government to promise that they'll be able to fight wherever this invasion is in the sky, and that this invasion is supposed to be a messiah that's supposed to be in the air and using holograms or whatever. And this messiah is supposed to be able to speak various different languages. Depending on what part of the world that you're from, you'll be able to understand what they're saying. And then it's supposed to disprove that Christianity and other religions are fake, and that they're the only way to be able to protect us from this invasion. But it's going to look so real because of this hologram. And people saying that they spotted like NASA and many other places in the desert already projecting like messiahs, like God in the sky and stuff, like testing out the technology now. And they were saying that this is their last attempt. If they can't get like the vaccines or any other thing to get us to conform, they're going to use that. And you'll start hearing in the news about alien sighting or potential invasion and stuff. And that's how they're going to get everybody to unite underneath one world government.
You'll have to message me this after the show, because I would love to look into this. This is like the first conspiracy that I've like.
Project Bluebeam.
I've not heard this one. That's interesting. Do you know anything about it? You want to expand on it, or?
Yeah, Werner von Braun. He has a secretary who said that the alien invasion would be the last trick that they would try to pull. So she's fairly credible. I never believe anybody 100%. I believe anybody. I believe all of you guys could be CIA plant actors trying to get me to say something goofy. Probably not. But you know, the
for anyone on the show that's doubting, no, fuck the CIA and fuck the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, so Project Bluebeam, like they are able to project holograms that are. And it makes you doubt once AI was released, which it definitely was a release. It wasn't like, oh, we just came up with this. It was the government allowing us to play with AI. And it's very with ChatGPT, like they released the full version at first and it was freaking awesome. They have since nerfed it to death to where now I'm going to probably try to get my own servers and have I get these 3 LLMs I might run so I can run an offsite AI on my own. But they are able to control so much of what we see digitally on the internet. If they are able to control what we can see physically in the sky, or be able to film things that look like wars or look like explosions or look like invasions. I mean, I've been suspicious about everything happening since 9/11 because 9/11 was such a giant not real event, at least as far as what they said it was. So anytime there's the war in Ukraine or what's going on in Gaza, unless I know somebody there and I physically have met them and I know who they are and I can tell that I am actually messaging with them, there's always doubt in my mind as to whether or not I'm getting the real information. But at some point, you just got to make choices. But most of those are based on what's happening in your household anyway.
Well, I mean, do you remember when CNN, and this was I believe it was CNN. Don't quote me on what actual news source it was, but I believe CNN. It was when the first Russian invasion of the Crimea region happened in like 2015 or whatever it was, and they were like, oh, the Russians are bombing Ukraine, and they were using video game footage, like literal footage from the video game. I believe it was Counter-Strike, and nerds, of course, they're like, hey, that's not real. That's from a game. But the people who weren't gamers had no idea because like, what's Russia doing bombing people? Like, I can't believe that they tried to run something so obviously retarded. Gaming at this point is the biggest entertainment industry in the world. It eclipses movies, it eclipses books, and you're trying to run video game footage and think people aren't going to catch that? Like,
yeah, they one of the first times they showed the stars in space, it was this balloon that went up to space, and you could look it up. It's first footage of the stars from space, and the footage is so obviously fake. Like it's the most ridiculous fake footage you've ever seen in your life. And when they aired it, they didn't say it was fake. But now, you know, years and years and years later, they say, well, they got the footage, but the footage was ruined. So to have footage B-roll for the news that day, they went to the planetarium and they filmed the planetarium pretending it was the stars. And it was like, oh, so it is fake. Yes, it's fake, but it's fake because the real one was ruined. And they do that all the time where they're like, well, there was a real bombing in Ukraine, but the footage was ruined. So we used video game footage. They get caught using crappy footage all the time where it's like, from a different war, from a different country, you know, totally different people, and they just keep rolling.
Yeah, that is
I
exactly.
just gotta give shout out to this comment. 30 years ahead using this video game footage. That was good, Blaine. Well played.
I feel as though our government, particularly in the U.S., is so desperate to get us to come together or to just fall in line again. But I mean, the thing is, the veil has been removed, and we've seen what's behind that veil. Like, I don't know if that's all because of like Trump with being the outsider getting in, or maybe like a mix of different things. But after seeing an outsider, someone who wasn't a part of the establishment, manage to insanely have this opportunity to be the president of the United States, and seeing all the powers that be uh, show their true selves coming together from both sides of the aisle to get rid of him or to relinquish what powers he has. It's scary. I can't unsee that. I don't think that some people can go along with it. They have. People want to believe that your government has your best interest at heart, and I don't know how people can
I don't know
still
why
feel that
people want
way.
to believe that.
A lot of
Yeah.
people, they're scared, and it's like, I get it. It is scary. That's why it's like you have to confront the devil head on. That's just what it is. And it's one of those things where I've seen both sides of our political aisle show their true selves. That, yeah, this whole time we had people on both sides of the aisle being elected, and we had faked it as though, oh, they were on two different sides when really they were on the same team all along, essentially my entire life. Yeah, I can't unsee that. There's nothing that you could do that's going to make me trust you. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to make me say, oh, it's time to come together and just go along with what our government says. No, like, there's nothing you could do that's ever going to genuinely make me feel that way. So to think that they're willing to go to last resorts, I mean, I have to assume that they will have to go to last resorts in order to try and bring upon unity, because I'm not doing it no matter what. And the last resorts are a scary thought process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you talk about last resorts. That's why I brought this clip up. I'm sure you guys have seen this, or if you haven't, I want to play it real quick and then get everyone's thoughts on it, because this is the fact that they think this would work again is just goes to show the level of gall they have. WHO Director General Tedros, and may be caused by influenza virus or a new coronavirus, or maybe caused by a new pathogen we don't even know about yet, what we call disease X. So let's listen to what this clown has to say.
History teaches us that the next pandemic is a matter of when, not if. It may be caused by an influenza virus or a new coronavirus, or it may be caused by a new pathogen we don't even know about yet, or what we call disease X. There has been a lot of attention on disease X, especially recently. But in fact, it's not a new thing. We first used the term disease X in 2018. It was just the same time I spoke here in this government site summit in 2018. And we used disease X as a placeholder for a disease we don't even know about yet, but for which we can nonetheless prepare. COVID-19 was a disease X, a new pathogen causing a new disease. But there will be another disease X, or a disease Y, or a disease Z. And as things stand, the world remains unprepared for the next disease X and the next pandemic.
All right, so that's in my opinion, that is them absolutely showing their hand without showing their hand. Like, if that's what they allowed us to see, if that's what they allowed us to put on the internet, then what is it that we don't know about? The idea that oh, hey, we need to prepare for the next disease X just goes to show for that they think they can do COVID-2 electric boogaloo, and that people are going to fall for it. And honestly, sadly, I think that there will be a good fair share of many that will.
Oh my God, these dudes are really cooking this up in the lab right now as we speak. Like these guys need to get locked up. Like this is crazy. They're literally letting us know this. Hey, we about to put another disease out there, and there's gonna be people that's gonna fall for this. There's gonna be some people that's gonna fall for this, but not as much as last time. You know, that's the good thing.
The reality is the inmates run the fucking asylum. The inmates have the keys. The inmates have the codes. The fucking inmates have everything, and this is why I'm just so disconnected. So I don't want to argue about politics until the discussion, as a libertarian, until the discussion is, hey, let's campaign to stop paying taxes and actually move forward with that. I don't want to have political conversations. I don't want to have political debates. I don't give a fuck anymore until you stop funding this entity that is trying to control us, and you don't want to fight to stop doing that. What is the point of all these other debates, of hating my neighbor, of arguing some asshole on Twitter about, them being wholeheartedly in belief that the government is on your side and has best interests at heart? What is the point of fucking arguing with these people when at the end of the day the discussion is not stop paying taxes?
Yeah. Like these guys are literally Umbrella from Resident Evil, and Fauci is Albert Wesker. Like this, that's all I can say. This is Resident Evil right now.
Fauci is not near as suave as Albert Wesker, but
they've been doing the same thing over and over and over again. The AZT scandal during the AIDS crisis, which the AIDS crisis came out immediately after there was an experimental hepatitis B vaccine that made its way through different cities, and it was followed closely by HIV. And AZT was the only thing that they would approve, and it was incredibly expensive, and it was a chemotherapy drug previously. And all my, it's the first time I went out in public and protested, and the gay community hated Anthony Fauci, and I couldn't believe they flipped so hard for him during COVID. And I was like, y'all, like maybe they were just too young to remember it, and all my old gay friends have since passed on. But it is
that's the Dave Chappelle joke, though. The Dave Chappelle's like, I got no problem with the gays, I just prefer those old Stonewall Jackson gays that knew how to fight. Like there's literal truth to that joke that so many people are too young now to understand.
Well, and it is good. It is. I appreciate the. I was always in theater, so gay people were always around, and they were always respected for the most part. It got better.
Everyone
and better.
thought I was one of those gay people, so I think it's
that's what we used to do. We used to when we were allies of the gay community back in the day. You would kind of be a lightning rod for other people, so we behaved in ways that drew attention to ourselves and away from our gay friends in high school, because we didn't want them to get shit or to be outed. But the capture of the regulatory agencies by the pharmaceutical corporations, it's like they follow this bell curve, and like they see a bell curve going down on something, and they insert a drug in that bell curve and then take credit for the finishing of the bell curve. They've done it with vaccines. They do it with they find some way, like in this bell curve.
Australia did it with gun violence. If you look before Australia banned all firearms, they and it doesn't matter where you are on the firearms debate, anyone watching, the fact of the matter is the decline of firearms related violence was declining at an equal rate prior to the ban, and it continued to fall after the ban at the same rate. The banning of the firearms literally did nothing when the decline was already there.
Yeah, firearms are in place precisely to prevent a government from taking over. That's the only reason for them to be in place. Personal protection, sure, but that's secondary to the ability of the people to really fuck some shit up if it becomes necessary. And people are like, oh, you can't fight against F-16s. And it's like, well, Afghanistan did. So
for like 16 years,
for decades, and they don't care. They could wipe Afghanistan off the map if they wanted to. They don't want to. They don't want to win wars. They want wars to continue on. They want diseases to continue on. They want conflict to continue on, because that's where they make money. And it's so obvious. They tell us every single time they're going to do something. They do event 201, and then COVID comes along, the flu disappears. People are like, the mask prevented flus. And it's like, well, geez, that seems like that would still work then against, like the fraud that is so obviously available, and the the sort of cheerleading you have to do to join team, government it's embarrassing to me when I see people like refusing to look at evidence like the flu disappearing, and they're like, that's because everybody masked, and it's like,
I heard that. Yes,
that doesn't make any sense.
So what you're telling us, Chuck, is that you're voting for Nikki Haley. She's your gal, isn't she? Like,
oh, I love her. I think she would be hilarious. She would be fantastically funny. I'll tell you this: the only and I typically vote absurdist. So sometimes I write in, just absurd people because. But I'll tell you, Kennedy has said he's listed out like 5 things. He said our food is poison. We need to take the fluoride out of the water. Julian Assange needs to come out of prison. And we need to take a look at vaccines. Like, he's got 4 of like 5 major things. Now, whether or not he can really follow through on that, but like, you could have if there was a president, he could put an executive order that immediately was put into effect and order the FDA to remove all fluoride from the water supply. And fluoride, most people don't know this. It's a byproduct of the fertilizer industry. And if they had to dispose of it, it would be incredibly expensive. So now they dispose of it through human filters and get paid for it. So it's just a money-making opportunity. Fluoride is a poison. It's a neurotoxin. It's terrible for you. You could change this country. This country would change in about 6 days if they took all the fluoride out of the water.
Well, RFK Jr. said something that, cause I love RFK. So far, he's not like my go-to that I'm voting for, but I respect the guy. I like him a lot. He's on the table as a possible vote for me. And the one thing that he said, I believe he said this relatively recently. I mean, he's probably said it 100 times, but he said it again recently, was that Americans didn't just become fat. Like, if you look at photos of us from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and now look at us, like, it wasn't just like an overnight change of, hey, we're lazy now. Something had to happen here. And it wasn't just because people decided to start buying quarter pounders more often than they were before. Like,
no, they're poisoning us. They poison the FDA's job is not to protect the human population of America. The FDA and the CDC, their job is to decide how many Americans can die and get ill before it is noticed and starts affecting profit. That's all they're there for. They aren't there to protect us. They're there to decide how many of us can die before it becomes noticed and they lose a revenue stream. That's all they do. And anybody who thinks they do anything differently is a fucking idiot. And I'm sorry, but you just really need to start, everybody needs to start having some of these. And these rational conversations are starting to happen in the public more often. I go to conventions. I'm used to being the only guy with my views in the room. That doesn't happen anymore. You can talk about anything now. I can talk about the moon landing openly. I can talk about 9/11 openly. I can talk about vaccines openly. Whereas before, just 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would have been terrified to do that outside of my panel. I would have been terrified to do it in a public venue that was not, and I was pretty bold. I spoke out a lot and people disagreed with me a lot, but the fear that was there, that is no longer there. We are definitely making some headway in terms of just being able to have the conversation about these topics. Their job of trying to call us, the gaslighting they do, where if you can't tell me exactly what's behind my lies, then you don't get to question it. And it's like, no, we don't have to know all the answers. We just get to ask questions. And if you can't answer them properly, we get to ask more questions. And if you're not going to answer them, then you're a liar. And that's how it goes. So, and everybody's starting to see that now, which is fun.
Well, I've noticed the same, conversations like these on the internet are happening more, but also you're right, at conventions. I actually was at an anime convention or a Comic-Con in general the last weekend or the weekend before last. And the sheer amount of people that were openly talking about political or social issues or whatever was something that I did not hear at conventions a decade and a half ago, whenever it was. I grew up, my dad was a nerd, so I've been going to conventions since I was literally 6 years old. So it's been 30 years worth of going to conventions for me. And there's been a notable shift, and so much of it seems to be because people are, I don't want to say the word apathetic, that apathy has turned into just exasperated anger. And I think that righteous exasperated anger is we can disagree on politics. We can disagree, hey, how much regulation should we have? How much taxes should we have? But if we're all angry and pissed off together and it's all directed at the same large governing body, that is powerful. And they are terrified of that because they see it happening, and their attempts to quell us seem to be failing. Minus, I mean, yes, you see people on X or whatever screeching about pronouns or wearing a mask or vaccines. But at that point, it makes the average person wonder, or at least I hope this is the average person, okay, are they this dumb or are they bought and paid for? Because it is one of the two. or both, I guess.
Yeah.
It does seem to be, especially on X, just a lot of people who are paid influencers. And I always say, I don't know if I would survive. I think I would. Knock on wood, I never have to face it. Well, I faced it a couple of times, but I don't know if I would survive someone walking up to me with $100 million contract who said, you can say everything you want to say, but you can't talk about vaccines. That would be a challenge for me morally, because I'd go, I can talk about everything. And so you'd kind of be like, you'd excuse it as I can focus my efforts in these other places.
Hey, someone else can talk about vaccines. I can talk about everything else. Someone else can handle vaccines, and I'll be separate. Dude, the amount of I see conversations like this, like you brought up Joe Rogan earlier, and I like Joe Rogan. I appreciate him. I watch him every now and again. When he says when he says he wouldn't do that because he has said things like that on his show before, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I hope you've got that level of conviction, but I don't know that I can name anybody in my life that has that level of conviction. $100 million it's like the human brain cannot quantify how much that would change your life. And all you have to do is not talk about a certain subject. If someone said, here's $100 million, you can never have sex the rest of your life, I'd be like, a lot of sex in my life. I can nix it for the rest,
I don't think I could, but that's my wife's pretty hot. So
well, my wife left me about 1.5 years ago, so it's a little bit easier for me.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
But yeah, no, I think that we're in this position where I think the righteous anger that we see on social media is, again, is 100% justified. I've found myself when I can actually have conversations with individuals that I disagree with. Now, obviously, there are those you are never going to reach. But when you watch people like I think Tim Pool is an example of this when he talks about how they cannot be convinced, or we need to beat XYZ because they will never come to your side. I disagree. I look at somebody like Daryl Davis, who had convinced all those white supremacist KKK individuals to denounce their affiliation with the Klan, and I'm like, it just depends on how you are attempting to spread that message. Not that it can't be done. It's hard. It's difficult. But it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Part of the reason they algorithmically divide us and then try to insert terminology so that you're an Antifa communist, you're a conservative MAGA Nazi, like the way they do those labels, like they do with the sort of flat earth debate, the glurf, flurf, they're trying to divide, because when people divide into those groups, they typically avoid just the reasonable conversation that happens in between those groups. Because when everybody gets together and everybody says, hey, wait a minute, which is happening now. What's happening is everybody, the whatever protective shell was keeping us from seeing the massive control and influence that corporations and news media are having on our individual lives. Once that shell was broken, they know they can't put it back together. My fear is that they're gonna you see them retreating to different sort of strongholds where they can, like this new the sort of mainstream alternative media, and everybody speaking in lockstep on that. You start to see the tentacles of control are trying to reassert themselves in this new landscape, and people are calling it out earlier and earlier and saying, no, we're gonna still go with sort of even more independent voices. And so we hear what the main narratives are and how they're trying to shape them. And they can't do it anymore. They can't. My fear is that they'll, or actually, it's sort of, they'll go. I think the real sort of end game is that they'll flip off the internet and the financial system, and we'll have 10 days or 30 days of chaos and starvation. So what people think is starvation, but pretty much everybody will be fine for 30 days with what they got in their house. You're not going to die.
I don't even think it's necessarily that. I think I don't know how you guys feel about the Capitol, but I've seen some videos where it's like, seems like they kind of just let homies just pull up.
Yeah.
That's what I feel as though they will, if anything, they will just create the point of where they will create a point of chaos so that they can inflict their loss or their rule. They themselves will construct the very catastrophe. I mean, we definitely feel some type of way about 9/11. I definitely feel some type of way about a lot of things. A lot of things I feel as though is definitely caused by, well, I think just about all of my problems are caused by my own fucking government. But hey, man, people want to have that debate, but I feel as though they will.
9/11 is 9/11 is a great example because they directly announced exactly what they were going to do on the spinoff of the X-Files called The Lone Gunman.
I was talking about this on a stream like 3 weeks ago. You're like the only person that knows this besides me. I'm so stoked. Go for it. Go in.
Yeah,
son.
so Lone Gunman, the pilot episode is about military industrialists remote controlling a plane into the World Trade Center to start a war without end in the Middle East. And it is 6 months before 9/11 happened. And people are like, that's so weird that they guessed that. It's like, they didn't guess that. They're programming us. They're programming us to accept it, to believe it. Because the thing about 9/11 that everybody's starting to see now is like, buildings don't just disappear. They don't just disappear. It is impossible for them to do that. And especially Building 7. When you watch Building 7 collapse, it collapses like this. So it's a building, it's intact, and it just completely sinks intact, straight down into a hole. Like that's what you're watching. You're watching a building drop into a hole. And when you watch the other two buildings disappear, they go from 1,100 feet to 40 feet in about 8 seconds. And that takes an incredible amount of energy that doesn't happen from part of the building falling on the totally intact part of the building. And so as all the architects and engineers start to see everything, and the pilots and everybody sort of has shaken the trauma-based mind control that happened on that day, and people are like, yeah, we have to admit this was a completely fabricated event. So if they're willing to do that with P-700 Granite missiles stolen off the submarine, the Kursk, during an exercise called the offloading of nuclear ordnance during a disaster, which they then had a disaster after, which is always their playbook. You run some op and the op goes live. The 7-Eleven in England, you have a terrorism expert on the BBC saying, yes, it was totally weird. We had 1,000 people working today at those 3 exact stations for this terror drill. And we had to go into from simulation to real world exercise. And the BBC presenter is like, wait, you were pretending that there were terrorist attacks at these 3 places, and then there were terrorist attacks at these 3 places. And they're like, yes, that's exactly what I said out loud to the world. And everybody just mindlessly trauma blinds through the whole thing saying we're scared. And I think there's more and more of us who just aren't scared anymore. And just the fact that I can mention it anywhere, I can talk about anything anywhere. I dropped the 9/11 lone gunman prediction just in public in the green room out loud to everyone, which was something I couldn't have done 5 years ago. So it's changing. And you can goof about the moon landing, and you can goof about COVID, you can goof about anything. And people are genuinely embarrassed if they hold the opposite opinion now. Someone has to be incredibly foolish to still believe the narrative on 9/11. You have to be some type of really, really trauma blind person not to have at least some questions about that day.
Well, I mean, what broke me when it came to 9/11, like what I consider my awakening moment. This was probably in 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. I was reading about it and watching videos and whatnot, and someone had done this. I believe it was a video about it wasn't about the towers, it was about the Pentagon, the plane that supposedly hit the Pentagon, and like the angle it would have had to go in, and then the lack of any sort of plane rubble. I was like, wait a sec, no one ever talks about the Pentagon when we talk about 9/11. Like that's it sent me down a rabbit hole, and at this point I'm absolute I don't want to say 9/11 denier, because it absolutely happened, but it didn't happen the way they are feeding us,
No.
So, and that's it's moments like that when when you say something like 9/11 denier, like when you say, oh, anti-vax, because you were talking about vaccines earlier, it's like I hate the term anti-vax because that immediately conjures images of people who are, oh, look at them, they don't understand how vaccines work. When even you yourself said earlier, vaccines work. It's the fact that we're taking 76 of them and injecting them into babies. That's not the same as saying vaccines don't work. When you hear the word anti-vax, it immediately conjures images of like Christian scientists or whatnot that don't believe in the science of vaccines. Like, no, they're separate things. There's one saying they don't work. That's a very, very small minority of people. The majority of anti-vaxxers are like, this is a government Ponzi scheme effectively, and that's why I'm anti-vax. And
take them one at a time.
With a term.
Yeah, tetanus, rabies, those are great vaccines. Those seem to work just fine. They're also not given to babies. You know what I mean? You don't give a baby a rabies or tetanus vaccine. The thing about the Pentagon that's always, to me, like proof positive that something other than a plane hit the Pentagon. Absolute proof to me is that there's 143 cameras. They could show us the plane hitting the Pentagon. There's 143. It's the most secure building on Earth. And on that day, there were 143 cameras, including like a couple dozen from businesses outside that were immediately collected by the FBI. And they gave us 5 frames. And it's like, you are showing us not a plane hitting the Pentagon. So it wasn't a plane. And my personal belief is that it was a P-700 Granite missile that had been stolen off the Kursk. And the Kursk was the Russian submarine that sank in the North Sea and everybody died. And it sank during an exercise called the offloading of nuclear ordnance during an emergency. And the reason I think that it was the P-700 Granite missile is because of the story it tells and the path it took. It took a 270-degree turn, burning 5,000 feet of altitude, and hit at waterline, which is what a P-700 Granite missile does on its final attack run, because they're meant to fly in a group towards a carrier group. So there's 13 of them in a swarm, and it has a lead one that's sort of doing some of the navigation, and it's meant to destroy an entire carrier group, and it's a nuclear missile. And so they knew it was by the signature that it was a P-700 Granite missile before it hit the Pentagon. The doors to Cheyenne Mountain closed before the Pentagon was hit. The only, and it's a Russian missile, so the only military to stand down on 9/11. So every military in the world went on high alert except one. One stood down, and that's the Russian military. And they were the first ones to call Condoleezza Rice on that day. And it was probably because they knew it was a P-700 Granite missile. And they said, we're standing down. That wasn't us. That wasn't our missile. And then good guys and bad guys within the Pentagon say, oh, God, we got hit by a nuclear missile. Thank God it didn't go off. What if what hit Tower 1 and Tower 2 had nukes on them? In order to save the city, we need to implement the demolition plan. And there's a very specific demolition plan that they would just implement, which was already in place since the buildings were built by permit variance, because you have to have a demolition plan when you build a building. So you have to know how you're going to take it down. And so they brought those buildings down via this pre-planned demolition to save the city. That's what the good guys thought. They thought they were bringing nuclear missiles down in to underneath the rubble. And they have 3 stories that day. One story was what the public was told. The second story is what they told the Security Council, which was that it was Iranian suitcase nukes. So that they believe that those buildings were taken down by Iranian suitcase nukes, so that they still believe it was Iran, because we all know that they're ticking off all these countries that have been resistant to the central banking system. So it's, they can't hide it anymore. They can't convince the public anymore. It's all falling apart. It's kind of exciting. I get a little scared every once in a while. I was a little nervous that everybody could talk about the shit that I used to have to talk about in silence. That there's a general knowledge of these
earlier
topics.
You said 5 years ago you couldn't do this, and I love the fact you said 5, because what was 5 years ago?
COVID, right before COVID.
In my opinion, even more so than that, 5 years ago was Jeffrey Epstein. That's when he supposedly killed himself. I think that was the catalyst for people saying, fuck it, we're done. Like Jeffrey Epstein, everybody, even the most anti-conspiracy theory people that I know, all believe Epstein was absolutely fucking murdered in that prison. So at that point, that was the catalyst for these conversations to become open and, semi-mainstream. At least that's my belief.
I don't believe he was murdered, but I totally agree with you on your premise that Jeffrey Epstein woke a lot of the world up, because we knew about him for years, like we knew about Harvey Weinstein for years. And if you would have said, is Epstein ever going to go down? I would have said no. When he went to prison, I was like, holy shit. When he committed suicide, and most people think he was killed, what I actually believe happened is that the white van that was parked in the docking bay there at the prison, which was a military van, wheeled in a cadaver that wasn't Jeffrey Epstein, and they took Jeffrey Epstein out. I don't think he was killed at all. I think we've got drone footage of him in a golf cart on his island, and it sure does look like him. And I've
actually seen that video as well, and it is convincing. Like it definitely does look like him. Yeah.
So I don't think he was killed. I think he had to go to prison for. I think a lot of these guys have doubles that do their prison time for them.
Well, that's something else that Family Guy has made jokes about. Like Seth MacFarlane, for whatever you want to think about his comedy or think about his politics. So people talking about how The Simpsons predicts the future. So many Family Guy jokes about celebrity doubles. He was making jokes about the Weinstein stuff years beforehand. Like clearly, to me, it's very obvious that, again, like the lone gunman, like the lone gunman, in your estimation, is trying to condition people to accept these things, as opposed to, in my opinion, Family Guy is like subtle things, hey, wake up moments, like what the word woke actually is supposed to mean. And I could be wrong. MacFarlane could absolutely be a CIA Ponzi or whatever, trying to, also indoctrinate folks. But like so many of it is exposing the negative and like, look how bad this is. It seems like it's trying to wake people up under the guise of jokes, which is what good stand-up comedians have been doing since the 70s, like George fucking Carlin.
Yeah, my favorite.
Yeah, more people's open for this discussion, because people like me, who people call me a conspiracy theory, they're looking at us like, man, these guys were fucking right. They're starting to see a lot of this stuff, open before their very own eyes, especially with the whole COVID situation. I've been called this out on social media, even with my friends, families. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, but now I got friends calling me back saying like, no, like you were right. They're seeing a lot of this stuff unfold. So now they want to listen. And even with illegal immigration and everything that's going on, especially with New York City, these sanctuary cities and stuff, and the violence skyrocketing and everything like that, people are starting to see their country fall apart. And it's like, no, these guys were right the whole time. So that's why people's more so having these discussion now, because it's actually affecting them. And they look at the media, and the media is telling them, oh, there's no such thing as inflation. In fact, inflation is actually good. They're giving all these different narratives, but they see it in front of them. Like, no, like what's going on? Oh, gas is not that bad, but every day, like you trying to determine, should I pay for gas or should I buy a carton of eggs? So it's not lining up. The media is not lining up to what you're seeing in real life, and that's why people's having this discussion now.
That's right.
Dude, it's so funny you bring that about groceries, because I was at the grocery store last week, and I had just read an article I thought about covering for my channel that was talking about how inflation's going down. And I was like, bullshit. I mean, things might be getting cheaper now compared to what they were, but everything's still way up. Bullshit. And then I go to the grocery store that night, and lo and behold, the steaks I normally buy, because I'm on the carnivore diet, are $1.50 cheaper than they had been for the last 6 months. It's like, oh, right, because that's almost re-election time. So of course they're gonna like, don't get me wrong, I was happy to pay a little bit less for steaks, but it's absolute bullshit, and we know what they're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But Chuck, you said 2 hours, you got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah, 10 more minutes left.
I want to go ahead and play one more clip and then ask one final question that is I believe is on everybody's mind. But let me get this clip queued up. Give me one moment here. Since we're since we're going so hard on the revealing what's behind the curtain, here's this right here. Have you seen this clip from Representative Justin Jones? Just left an event honoring a black sorority and spoke of the need to unite against the rising tide of white supremacy, only to be confronted by Nazis marching through downtown Nashville. This is exactly what my Republican colleagues hate speech is fostering and inviting. Have you seen this clip?
No, but yeah, sure, you can show it. It's hilarious. I'm sure.
Let's go for it. This is going to be funny.
They are literally having a Nazi march. Here in downtown Nashville. White supremacists talking about white supremacist neo-Nazism, talking about deporting folks and just racial hatred. This is what we're seeing here in Nashville. They are literally having Nazi.
I mean, say it with me, kids. Feds.
Yeah, feds,
I mean,
man. Come on.
The whole Whitmer kidnapping should have taught everybody. Like everybody, once they were like that, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, the kidnapping plot, which was absolutely made up by the FBI. There's another one that happened before that. They're called the Albany Five or something in New York Five, and it's these 5 Muslim dudes, none of whom were terrorists, and they got 20 years each because the FBI just made them into terrorists, just makes them into terrorists. They just make what they need to fight against 100%. It's a joke. It's a joke.
So, well, now that we're all in the agreement that those are feds, anyone in the comments and in the chat, if Chuck is amenable to it, if you want to field questions for about 10 minutes,
sure,
if that's all right?
Absolutely.
All right. Anyone that's got questions for Chuck, absolutely. Lay them on us, and he'll do his best to give his honest answers. Clearly, nothing is off the table considering the last 2 hours.
Absolutely. Game on, man. Game on.
Also, thank you for showing up, Zach. Appreciate you, my friend. Let's see. I
have a question.
Sure.
If you could be a part of any entertainment, if it be a TV show or video game, what would you like to be a part of because you think it's actually pretty awesome?
Well, all during Breaking Bad, everybody in Texas, the DFW area, got looks at all those extra parts that were on Breaking Bad, and then Better Call Saul as well. I never got on any of that. That would have been a great one to be on.
Heck yeah.
Plenty of people have people we know, actors we know, have recurring. Charles Baker, Tina. I can't remember Tina's last name all of a sudden. But both of them had really nice recurring roles. Everybody's super proud of them, not jealous, just like that's awesome. So to be part of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul would have been amazing. From a voiceover standpoint, anything Miyazaki would be incredible. And then from there, we go into my projects. I have this film I'm producing called Mud Life that will be tentatively shooting in Chicago in the spring. I've got a horror film I'm writing called Horror Cane, which is a take on Sharknado. It's fun. I'm sort of writing it before I to get revved up to write the sort of more important pieces of work that I have, entertaining pieces of work that take the Marvel universe and Star Wars universe and flip it on its head, and we get to start exploring a whole other realm of possibilities, a little bit more ancient alien style. It's alternative Tartarian history or something. I don't know. Whatever we're living in, it's a giant
Western media. I'm so ready for Western media as it is to improve and evolve. So that right there, you said flip whatever the MCU and Star Wars is doing. That immediately has me absolutely hyped. So glad to hear that. Dexonaro is saying favorite Hiei senior voice. Understand it's been a while. I gotta add
Dragon of the Darkness Flame. I came into that session and we're in the dark tournament, and then Justin was like, "Man, you should see what you do today." I was like, "What happens?" He's like, "You whoop up, your whole arm turns into a smoky dragon, and then your arm's all spent." And I was like, "That sounds awesome." We went into the booth and rocked that out. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. I have a question. You provided a voice for Android 17 and Dragon Ball Fighters, the fighting game, right?
Right.
Yeah. How long are those sessions when you're recording for like video games? How long does
Yes.
it actually take?
They usually book us in 2-hour blocks, and I usually
Mhm.
finish almost everything that needs to happen within an hour if
Oh,
it's a
wow.
2-hour session. And sometimes I'll have 4 or 6 hours, and they split it up into 2 or 3 different sessions. But that's usually if there's a couple of things happening at the same time. They have you there, so they just keep working you.
Oh, awesome. And one more other question. As far as Dragon Ball Super is concerned, when they made the announcement for the return of the series, was you expecting to hear from them for you to reprise your role as Android 17?
Yeah, well, the first role I reprised was Emperor Pilaf in Battle of the Gods, and that surprised me. I was like, what? I get to come back as Pilaf? And they were like, yeah. And then when it was really when I watched the Japanese DB Super air, and I got to see what the journey was and see what the fans thought of the journey. That's when it became very, very real to me that like, oh, holy cow, I'm in something that the whole world is watching.
Awesome.
And my character is doing something amazing in it. So that was fun. Waking up and trending on Twitter. You're like, oh, Android 17 is trending on Twitter. That's crazy.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. I'm looking through, seeing if there's any comments. Oh, right here from Kate. Kate is actually that best friend I mentioned who saw your Fringe, your Fringe panel live. Kate is amazing. We're going to be going to an anime con in April together. Can't wait. It's been like 10 years since we've gone to a con together. She says, Chuck, have you seen the live action Yu Yu Hakusho?
I saw the previews, the trailer for it, and I was like, that's pretty good. That's not. I didn't like Hiei's design very much. He didn't feel very Hiei-like. It was a little white heavy. He always seemed like a darker character to me, so it's a little bit too much white in his design. I didn't watch the series. I heard it was compressed. I heard it was not terrible. It at least seemed to stay true to the spirit of how those characters would have interacted with each other. So I think it was not as good as what people were saying One Piece was like, but it wasn't. It was no Dragon Ball Evolutions.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah.
Before I ask Cat's question, I guess. So, did you watch live action One Piece by chance? And if so, did you feel like that was better, or that was actually what fans should be getting? Or
yeah, I watched pieces of it.
Oh,
my
actually,
son is
that's the same thing. Cool. Thanks, Salty.
Yeah,
Sorry.
The live action One Piece was definitely better. My son is a big One Piece fan. He said it was really good, and you could just tell from the casting was done correctly. So the casting felt like those characters, and the nothing substitutes for that. Everybody has to feel that those characters are the ones that are the same in the anime, and if they're not, then you're like, I don't quite buy it. They can't transfer it and make the characters different. They have to stay the same.
Kat says, "How did you decide what? How do you decide what a voice will sound like, and how do you keep them all straight when you're doing multiple characters at a time?"
After this long, keeping them straight is very easy. They've worn very familiar grooves in your vocal instrument that just you can pop right in and out of. But deciding what a voice is like, it usually starts with listening to the Japanese voice actor, the seiyuu, and seeing what they did with the voice. And we don't try to imitate the quality of their voice, and we don't try to imitate their performance. We try to see what they were going for, try to understand what they were trying to accomplish as an actor. What's the objective that character seemed to be working for? And then we try to have the same objectives and then solve them with our own instrument, which is different from their instrument. Sounds different, culture's different. It's you can't do what they do. Japanese, especially in anime, comes from kabuki theater. There are very broad moments that, the closest we get to it with American is like with Emperor Pilaf and his gang. They're almost directly from vaudeville. So it's very vaudevillian style. But we start by listening to the Japanese seiyuu and then make it our own interpretation, trying to be as true to the original as we can be without sacrificing the acting quality.
Awesome. Last chat question, and I'll get to the final question. I'm looking through Chuck's filmography. He's having an amazing career and 6 kids. My question, does he ever get to sleep?
Yeah, we sleep good. I got one of those beds that monitors your sleep, and
Oh wow.
we just shifted our bed into a different room in preparation for the baby, and it's a darker room and it's a quieter room. And yeah, my wife and I are getting great sleep lately. Now I'm sleeping poorly on the road. I used to sleep pretty good on the road. Now on the road, I'm not sleeping so great. But yeah, once the baby gets here, there will be less sleep. Although we do attachment parenting, so it's not like we stick the baby in another room and let them cry. The baby just stays with us till they're ready to leave. So you get more sleep that way.
Mm-hmm.
And final question: pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
So if someone has ordered pineapple on pizza, I'm gonna eat it. Am I gonna order it for myself? Nah, I wouldn't order it for myself.
All right. that is honesty right there. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna go ahead, do our sign-offs, and great luck, good luck at your class tonight. And tell the people who you are, what you do, where they can find you, how they can support you, the whole nine.
Yeah, I'm Chuck_Huber on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. That's where I make people mad at me. It's where I've been canceled 3 or 4 times for different opinions that I've held. So that's the place where I'm probably the most fun. My Instagram is usually me hiking or announcing my classes. My TikTok has some cool stuff on it. I'm not as good at it as I was at the beginning when my wife was making me do it, but it's got some fun stuff on it. I'll be in Claremore, Oklahoma this weekend for a convention just outside of Tulsa with Billy West, Lindsay Seidel, Walter Jones, and Aaron Roberts, all wonderful people that I love. So Tulsa, we should have a good time this weekend.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it, man. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Let's pass it over to the queen of the tomboys, Cult Classic Cage. Tell the people who you are, what you do, where they can find you.
Yeah, guys, this is awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me, Leon. This is definitely, didn't think I was gonna be able to talk to someone I've listened to since I was, preteen. That's crazy. But thank you so much, Chuck, for hanging out with us. And honestly, I learned a lot, and it was really casual. I think that's the best way to learn something, right? In a very casual, just fun discussion between, the homies. So that's what's cool. What it's all about. If you want to check out what I got going on, Cult Classic Cage on YouTube, Twitter. Haven't been doing Kick as of late because I've been super busy, but I missed actually, doing like, a podcast and hanging out with y'all because I've been super busy with life and stuff. So thank you so much, Leon, for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm happy to. You were legit one of my best friends, girly. I couldn't let this pass up. And same goes for my man Mugen Lord here. Last but not least, tell the people who you are, what you do, where they can find you.
All right. Yeah, I really appreciate being the guest here, Leon. Really appreciate it, and it was awesome being able to talk to Chuck. I also cosplay Android 17 back during Otakon a couple years ago, so one of my favorite characters. But you can also catch me on YouTube. Like I said, I cover a lot of culture war type of content. RPGs, video games in general on my channel, Mugen Lord. And also, if you want to chat it up with me, and I can be pretty controversial on Twitter, so you can just type in Mugen Lord on Twitter. And if there's some topics you want me to cover, you can go on Twitter, DM me, or just leave a post on one of my tweets. I'll check it out and probably turn it into a video. But thanks for allowing me to come through. Really appreciate it.
No, I'm happy to do it, man. Thank you. And last but not least, of course, you got your hostess with the mostest. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone that came through for keeping the chat so supportive, keeping the chat functioning with questions and integral to conversation. Thank you so much to Chuck and, of course, Cassie and Mugen for coming on. At the end of the day, you guys know why we do the streams. We do these streams because politics, social issues, they can be divisive. We do not all have to agree, but we do have to all have the mental wherewithal to have these conversations, to be able to agree and disagree civilly, and just to be able to get the information out there, information that's not necessarily always mainstream, information that you don't necessarily always like that's coming out of individuals' mouths, whether you agree with them in general, whether you follow them. There are things that were said on this show today that I disagree with and multiple that I do agree with, and that's what this is all about, is fostering communication, because there is not enough of that, but it seems like it is growing. So I challenge each and every one of you to also do the same thing out there in your lives. And remember, it's all here. Oh, and also I wanted to, of course, say thank you so much for the super chats and the support. Everybody who came through today, again, you do not need to do that, but the fact that you do help us grow the channel, I appreciate that. And now it's all here in the Nerdosphere. This has been Words of